Let's do it. We'll see what we get.
Yep.
Okay, we're going to see what we get.
Sounds good.
All right, so 3, 2. So you are the executive director of Haley House,
Yes.
and we're just going to start talking. 3, 2, 1. You know what? I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to flip around. 3, 2, 1. Hi, and welcome to Unplanned, the show about cities and how they work. I'm Sam, your host. We're back in what used to be called Dudley Square, is now called Nubian Square. And we're here with a very old friend of mine, somebody I've known for decades and decades now, Bing Broderick, who is the former executive director of Haley House, which is right down the street from where we're sitting. We're currently in the Boston School Committee building. And we're going to learn all about Haley House and all about what Bing has been up to over these last couple of decades. Bing, welcome to Unplanned.
Thank you, Sam.
I am now going to switch positions so we can have a real conversation. So, Bing, by the magic of television, we're now sitting this way. So you were the former executive director of Haley House. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Haley House and what it is, and when we start there?
Sure. So Haley House started in the south end of Boston. Kathy and John McKenna were living in an apartment on Upton Street, and they had spent some time on the Lower East Side with Dorothy Day at the Catholic Worker, and were really inspired by her and wanted to try doing something like that in Boston. And they started by welcoming some guys who were out on the street into their apartment.
What years?
66.
Oh, 66.
And so they brought some folks in. At the time, the South End, the folks who were living on the streets were World War II vets and had what we would today call PTSD, though they didn't call it that at that time. Shell shock, I think, is what they called it. And they welcomed them into their apartment, gave them some food and a place to sleep. And that was the beginning of Haley House. That was, I think, February of 1966. In 67, they actually acquired a building at the corner of Dartmouth and Montgomery in the South End, and that was slated for development. And they were able to purchase the building at the outset, and that gave them a place. It also ensured the future of Haley House. If we didn't own that building, we wouldn't exist.
Now, is that the same building where you're located now, that I know, which is just on the street here?
No, so a lot happened over time at Haley House. As the South End started to get gentrified, we were able to acquire housing. We have today 110 units of housing. And we started a farm initially out in Winchendon, an hour and a half outside of Boston, but today it's about a half mile from here in Highland Park. In the 90s, some folks knew how to bake in the soup kitchen. They showed others how to bake. Neighbors smelled the bread, wanted to buy the bread. All at once, we started a bakery and a training program. And that grew over the course of about 10 years. And ultimately, we moved the bakery out of the soup kitchen to then Dudley Square, today Nubian Square. And we opened the Haley House Bakery Cafe at that time. And that's when I started at Haley House.
And what year was that?
2005.
2005. So we've talked a lot about what it does, but what is Haley House? What's the mission of it? What's it all about? What were they doing back in '66? They were trying to solve.
It's always been about building community, and largely with food, using food as a vehicle to build community. That has, we believe in food with purpose and the power of community is our kind of tagline.
And how, dare I ask, how successful do you feel you've been? I mean, there's obviously this concept of breaking bread, sitting down and breaking bread together. and we all need food to live, to survive. Does it work? I mean, a lot of probably you and I both have done work in these communities that have a lot of needs, and humans with a lot of needs. How would you assess the work?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned breaking bread, because during my interview, I said to Kathy McKenna, I love, bread and the symbol of bread as sustenance and as a form of community building. And she said, yeah, well, we don't make bread anymore. That kind of shut me up.
What did they move on to?
Well, so basically, when the bakery began in the soup kitchen, bread was what we made. When we before we moved to Nubian Square, we started doing cookies and brownies and muffins and scones, and we sold. One of the things that really helped us grow was we sold baked goods to cafes all over the city. So places that would sell coffee and wanted something to go with it. And some places really wanted to promote the social mission of their of the bakery that was making. Some just wanted to give people food. But either way, it worked. And that really helped us to build a lot.
And what do you, jumping forward or slightly shifting the focus a little bit, you've been in Nubian Square, what was Dudley Square, now Nubian Square, over about 20 years now. We did an episode of Unplanned, which you've seen, with Cairo Shen, who was the planner for the city of Boston, and Francine Newman, who was the designer of the building we're sitting in now. And what's your take of the transformation, yes, no, maybe, of the community in which you've been doing the work in?
Let me start by saying that the Ferdinand building, which is the precursor to this building, was closed. It was an old furniture showroom, and it was closed during the blizzard of '78, and it never reopened. The old orange line used to go right by these windows. We're in the second floor here, and those were showcase windows. You'd look out the window and see the little set, the setups. And a lot of people in this community would buy furniture on layaway at Ferdinand. So it held a really important place in this community. It was then boarded up, and then following that, the elevated railway came down, and in the center of Dudley Square, in the center of the city of Boston, was this image of disinvestment in this community. And so the vision to redesign, re-energize, using this building as its core, it was Tom Menino's thing. He said, this is what we've got to do. And he saw it through. It had several groundbreakings, and he made it happen. And it is really a testimony to his legacy. I mean, it's really been, I really credit him with having that vision. There was hope that it would activate the whole community after 6 o'clock at night. That hasn't happened. All of the restaurants initially tried to stay open late till 9 and to activate the building at night. But after about a year, that became really unsustainable.
And that's pre-COVID, right? Or was that a COVID
No,
thing?
that was pre-COVID. Yeah.
And why was it unsustainable? I mean, there wasn't enough activity, presumably.
It wasn't enough activity.
So
I think it was a big jump to go from, there were 6 restaurants that opened at once. All
in the ground floor of the building?
Well, in the neighborhood.
In the neighborhood,
yeah.
Right.
So it was a lot to sustain, and even now with only 3 of them still open, they're still struggling,
Right.
So.
And is that because they, why do you think that's because? I mean, are they too expensive for the neighborhood? Are they selling foods that aren't of interest in the neighborhood? Do people not go to restaurants typically in this neighborhood?
One thing I will say that the developers got right is they were very intentional about not bringing in chains. And I think they realized that if you give people options that they can get anywhere, you're not going to really be building community. And so all of the folks that came in were pretty much independents. The most successful business in this building is Gallery Eye Care. And that was successful immediately because everybody needs eyeglasses. You can do it right here in your community. That's great. But, I think everybody else has struggled. So.
And bringing this back to Haley House and the work you were doing there, I mean, how do you relate that story to the work you did for 2 decades at Haley House? And tell us again, what was that work about? I mean, what was that? What were you trying to do?
So when the Bakery Cafe first opened, we were really trying to just expand from being a bakery only into being a cafe. And we were really wanting to, offer food that was culturally relevant, that was really, what people wanted. And we were fortunate to have a chef named Dee Dee Emmons who had opened a number of restaurants around the city, and she was very gifted in terms of her culinary skills, and she really worked to develop a menu that people responded to, and she listened to them. But what happened at the same time was people came through the door with ideas. So while we're putting food out, people are coming in asking, hey, can we do a performance series here? How about a dinner and a movie event? You need art on these walls, let's do it. And all of those are the things that actually gave community ownership of the space and a sense of really investment in what we were doing there. So I mentioned that we had a training program in the South End in the soup kitchen. When we moved to Nubian Square, we brought that training program. And the training program worked with folks who were in any kind of transition. We had folks who were in recovery, folks who were coming home from prison, we had folks who were refugees, a lot of different circumstances. And around 2009, with the economic downturn, we had a wait list of 50 people for 5 spaces, which is essentially a 5-year waiting list.
5 spaces to do?
For training.
For training.
And so with a 5-year waiting list, you're not really helping anybody. And so we took a hiatus and just tried to figure out how to be more intentional about what we were doing. And we had a catering manager at that time, a guy named Danny Cordone, who had spent 15 years in federal prison. And he said, there are no opportunities for folks coming home from prison right now. And he said, I think we should focus on returning citizens. And we did. And this is 2010, so it's before New Jim Crow, before a lot of the social consciousness around mass incarceration. And for Danny to recognize that and lead us in that direction was a great gift to the organization.
And how did that manifest itself in terms of what you all tackled?
Well, we were able to welcome home a lot of people and give them some skills. Not necessarily, they didn't necessarily want to work in restaurants, but they developed really good life skills to see them through and a community of people to support them.
And is that something that was part of the Haley House mission? I often wonder, you hear a lot in this kind of work of, it's one thing to train somebody or give them some training or some skill sets, but the follow-up is often as important, if not more important. How did you think about that?
Yeah, one thing that we try to do as much as possible is honor people's anniversaries, and especially the 3-year anniversary, because the odds of your returning to prison after 3 years, if you make it through 3 years out, the chances are you're not going back, And, that said, I know, from many firsthand accounts of, what people face on a day-to-day basis of just, on a slow night, license plate numbers getting run, pulling people over, all kinds of things happen that people who are returning citizens have to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
And then a little bit later on, I don't remember exactly, but in the 20-teens, I think, you opened something in this building that was, well, tell us about that. I believe it was called Dudley Doe. But help us.
So basically, we had been, when we first opened in 2005, it was a grand experiment. And after about 5 years, we realized this has legs. We'd just been looking forward, keeping the door open day after day. And after 5 years, we realized this is actually an ongoing concern. And people in different neighborhoods said, could you do that in our neighborhood? And we didn't really have the bandwidth to replicate, but we were always thinking about what would it mean what would be a model for replication. And one thing we landed on was pizza dough. We made pizza dough for Veggie Planet in Harvard Square, and so we knew pizza dough, and we had applied to be in this building, and when we were designated, we said, let's try to create that model here. And so we opened Dudley Doe in October of 2015, which was when the building became open at the retail level. And that was that lasted about 2.5 years. Our whole model was based on a profit sharing model, and after 2.5 years, we weren't halfway to break even. So it was pretty clear that, and there was no indication that was going to change anytime soon. At which point, our board said, "I think we need to call it quits on that," which you did.
And beyond just the business lesson, because there are a lot of businesses that open and struggle to break even, but you had a mission related to your business. What did you take away from that? I mean, what did that tell you about trying to replicate the model or the difficulty of getting something like that?
Yeah, I think that we thought that pizza has a higher markup than standard restaurant fare, so we thought we were positioned for success. But I think that what we learned in the process was that we weren't ready for it here. That there were for whatever reason, we weren't able to sustain it all. There are plenty of pizza places around. Our idea was a healthier pizza, and the pizza was really good.
Yeah. What do you think about? I've often one of the urban planning things that I've always found really fascinating is just kind of one of those happenstance, random factors that also at the same time is not at all random, which is that the #1 bus in Boston travels basically from Nubian Square to Harvard Square and back. And these are two ancient squares in Massachusetts, which means they're 400 something years old. And Europeans have been sort of settled in these areas about 4 centuries now. But they are about worlds different in so many ways. One got a university, one didn't get a university, but they trace their heritage back to very early colonial days. I've often been fascinated by that as a kind of anecdote about I'm not sure exactly. What thoughts does that bring to your mind about, what does this say about this? Menino worked mightily to have this building created and also create some economic activity in the zone, but it's still, there still are plenty of issues. Now, there are plenty of issues in Harvard Square too, but I don't know. What are some of your thoughts about?
Yeah, I think that in terms of the question about Menino's vision and its realization, there's a lot of development going on right now, and I think that Nubian Square in 5 years will have a number of buildings that aren't here now, and I think that the question for me is, how do we build it for everyone? And so I think that your point, I think, is well taken. I also often think that about the Red Line. I've lived at both ends of the number 1 bus and both ends of the Red Line, and you do see a really broad range of broad variety of folks on both, and so I think that there's a lot of building going on all over the city right now, and I think Boston is at a critical point in thinking about who it's building for.
And with that, I'll ask you the wrap-up question. First of all, I thank you for being on unPlanned. It's a joy to see you as always, but it's nice that you join us for this. I think I actually have 2 wrap-ups, but we're going to start with this. New mayor in Boston, new era. I mean, we're grappling with a lot of issues now, not just in Boston, but new mayor, new issues for the city, and Haley House itself. What do you foresee over the next 5, 10 years for each, for the city itself and for the organization?
Well, I'm really excited about the person who's come in to succeed me as executive director. I've seen him on the last couple of days. We've spent a lot of time together, and he's younger than I and has a lot of good energy and a lot of vision. And I'm excited for where he will take it. I think that the city, I'm not sure where the city is going, and it's one thing I'm excited about is actually spending more time in the neighborhood where I live and do some community building there. That's really exciting to me.
And I can't resist this because it's always been of interest to mine, but maybe even particularly more so recently. Before you got into community building in Haley House, you were connected to a small but famous record company in North Cambridge. And I'm just curious if you'd tell us a minute about that world and that life and what the record company was.
Yeah,
it's a wonderful
sure.
institution.
It was Rounder Records, and I had always wanted to work in music, and I had been roadieing for a rock band, and the tour ended in Boston, and I walked in the door of Rounder, and I asked if they were hiring, and they said, "Oh, you saw the ad in the paper," which turned out was in the paper every week. And I said no, but started working there at $3.75 an hour and working in the warehouse, which is how everybody at Rounder started in those days. It was a union house, and Rounder ran a distribution company, and we distributed about 350 labels, all throughout New England. Usually, most of our accounts were in New England, and it was an exciting place to work. It was very grassroots, in many ways, it prepared me for Haley House because it had a similar ethos. It was a for-profit business, but profit was never top of mind. It was really about the music and the community that the music built.
And these were, for those who don't remember, these were vinyl albums. And the newspaper was presumably a paper newspaper with a little ad that was like that big. It was a little square, a little rectangle.
I had a unique situation at Rounder in that starting in the early 90s, I Rounder was well set up with record stores around the country, and there were plenty of bookstores and niche markets, everything from Irish sweater shops to, there are other places that would sell music, but there was no one really to market to them. And I became the head of special marketing at Rounder, which meant that I distributed to the Feminist Bookstore Network and the Latin Jazz distributors.
Well, Bing, I want to thank you for being on Unplanned, and I want to thank you for spending some time with us and talking about Haley House and Nubian Square and work you've been doing to make this world a better place. We hope. I mean, it's hard work. We know it's hard work. What's next for you? You're the former executive director. So what's next time?
I wrapped that one up, and now I'm exploring what's next. I don't know, and that's exciting.